Our conversation today is going to be looking at the Reformation. The Protestant Reformation is a series of events that begins round about 1517 or so in Central Europe and winds up spreading around the rest of Europe, but then ultimately throughout the rest of the world. Now, for many of you, you will have heard of the Protestant Reformation and the religious denominations that emerge out of it before. Denominations such as Lutheranism, Calvinism, Presbyterianism, Anglicanism, or the Church of England, and many, many others. These religions grow out of this movement that begins again roughly around 1517 and sweeps throughout the world. Now, although the Protestant Reformation is most definitely a religious movement, it is not exclusively a religious movement. The Protestant Reformation also has very many political aspects to it. Again, we are talking about Europe in the 1500s. Europe in the 1500s is a continent that is dominated by the Catholic Church and by religious individuals all throughout the reaches of government and society. So when religious changes occur, it is inherently going to involve changes to politics and society, right? So the Reformation is not exclusively a religious event. That being said, right, it also doesn't come out of the blue, right? There are things that lead up to the Protestant Reformation prior to its outbreak in 1517 with Martin Luther. And let's look at some of those now. So why does the Reformation begin? One of the major problems that the Catholic Church was experiencing at the time, and again, the Catholic Church, for those of you who maybe don't know, the Catholic Church is a religious institution based out of Rome, headed by a pope who is both a political and a religious leader that oversees a global institution, right? An institution that has churches and church leaders throughout the world, and in particular, obviously for our story, in Europe. The Catholic Church by 1500 or so, by the 1400s, and certainly earlier, was very much a religious institution, but also very much a political institution. And there are many popes, many leaders of the church, popes and others, right? So pope is at the top, then there are cardinals, bishops, and priests. There were many church leaders who very much were not concerned with their religious obligations. So you have people like Pope Julius, who was much more of a militaristic and political leader who cared very much more about the success of his family and the wealth that his family could get from his work than he did for the Catholic Church. You have people like Alexander VI, who was a pope in the late 1400s, who also did a lot more for his family and his children than he did for the church. There are also other issues such as simony, which was the paying for sacraments or paying for privileges, that you basically just pay a priest for a privilege that you desired, and that could happen, whether that was becoming a religious figure higher than you should have or anything else. There was absenteeism, bishops and other clergy members basically just collecting the salary for the institutions that they ran, even though they may never actually appear there. And finally, indulgences. And I'm going to hold off on indulgences for a few moments. So throughout this period, the Catholic Church was experiencing many issues with their leadership and with the perception others have. The Reformation, as I said a few moments ago, begins in Central Europe. In particular, it begins in the lands of the Holy Roman Empire. The Holy Roman Empire, although we have this perception of it being an empire based around the Habsburg family and its political center at Vienna, the Holy Roman Empire was anything but politically unified. In fact, as you'll see in a moment, it was very divided among 300 or so different German-speaking territories. And as a result, when Luther and other reformers are looking for places to pitch their religion, the scattered and diverse and not politically unified nature of the Holy Roman Empire will offer many benefits to them. So as a result, Central Europe is a great place for this Reformation to begin. And that's what this map here is attempting to show you. This sort of spattered and sort of divergent pieces, right? So this gray line that I'm outlining currently is the boundaries and the borders of the Holy Roman Empire. And within this is a very disunited territory. So why does the Reformation begin here? And why is it successful when it is? One of the things that is going on simultaneously, if not even just a little bit before this, is the European Renaissance, which we've discussed. The growing aspects of humanism, the growing ideas of individuality, and in fact, the growing skepticism towards the wealth of the Catholic Church is all part of this. Right, the sort of growing ideas of humanism, individuality, the sort of what makes a good person a good person. Those are pieces that are coming out here, and people are starting to take those ideas of individuality and what it means to be a good person, and pursuing those further. Well, again, we'll talk about that in a second. You have the monarchs emerging, right? There is a strong central monarch emerging in France and in Spain. In Britain, you have the emergence of people like Henry VIII, who will be talked about a little bit later. You also have the emergence of the printing press. And this is an important event. In the 1450s, the printing press, movable type, comes to Europe, was invented in Asia and brought to Europe, and Johann Gutenberg, who is an inventor in Germany, develops a technology that can make reprinting books much quicker. So essentially what happens is you take a giant board, you arrange the letters of your words into paragraphs, into pages, and you can press paper onto that constantly to develop more and more books. What happens here is the price of books goes down tremendously as more and more pamphlets are emerging, right? So the number of books being produced, we have, around 600 CE or AD. You have, around 50, tens of thousands of books being produced. But then by the time you get to our period in around the 1450s, that number jumps quite substantially to the 1800s. So you have the growth of books being produced exceptionally quickly. Along with that, you have the price of books going down, right? The real price of books going down quite substantially. So a price of a book might cost around £1,800, dollars, whatever, in the 1300s. But once you start to get the invention of the printing press, that number drops substantially. And what I'm trying to illustrate here is that the price of these books goes down. And that is a real change for people. Because now that I can afford to buy a book or I can afford to buy a pamphlet, maybe it's worth me learning to read. So now we have this political situation in the center of Europe, fragmented, disunited, a cultural movement where people are learning to read and learning to understand. And now we enter into a period where we look at the causes of that Reformation, in particular in a person like Martin Luther. So Martin Luther was a Roman Catholic Church member. He was a priest within the church. And he was obsessed with salvation. He was obsessed with this idea of what or how a person can go to heaven. And he was upset by the fact that the Catholic Church was teaching that a person can go to heaven or achieve salvation by doing good deeds or by saying prayers. And for Luther, there was no evidence of that in the Bible. So in 1515, along with this, Pope Leo X in 1515 issues a declaration that says that the church will sell indulgences to help pay for the building of St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. And this money, an indulgence, would help a person go to heaven. So the idea here is if a person wanted to either go to heaven themselves, if they were worried about their own salvation, or if they were concerned with their families' potential going to heaven, they could seek out a priest who was selling indulgences, purchase an indulgence, and take years off of the time of waiting for salvation for family members. This really bothered Luther. These were expensive. Some of them could cost as much as a half a year's wages. And so they were expensive, and Luther believed they didn't mean anything. So there's also this sort of targeting idea here, right? So Johann Tetzel says, "Don't you hear the voices of your wailing dead parents and others who say, 'Have mercy upon me, have mercy upon me, because we are in severe punishment and pain. From this you could redeem us with a small alms, yet you do not want to do so. Open your ears, as your father says to the son and the mother to the daughter. We have created you, fed you, cared for you, and left you our temporal goods.'" Right? So he's really targeting the emotions of the people here. And Luther then writes to the bishop of his area and says, "The souls committed to your care, good father, are taught to their death, and the strict account which you must render for all such grows and increases. For this I have no longer been able to keep quiet on this matter. For it is by no gift of a bishop that a man becomes sure of salvation, since he gains this certainty, not even by the impure grace of God, but the apostles bid us always work out your own salvation in fear and trembling. The righteous scarcely shall be saved." So it's the idea here that for Luther, right, it's not indulgences that get a person salvation. It's faith. So Luther's ideas are printed very widely. We are now 60 years removed from the invention of the printing press, or the Gutenberg printing press, and his ideas spread substantially. He gets into a lot of trouble with the Catholic Church, and his ideas, though, gain a lot of support. One of the things that gets him a lot of support is this idea of a simpler and more less complicated religion, looking at sort of true, more faith based on the Bible, getting rid of church abuses. And he declares that the Bible is the source of the information, not the Pope and not others. So he is put on trial. In 1521, he is sent to trial at what was called the Diet at Worms. Okay, so just an important piece here. So the word diet in this context means like councils. Think of it as like a city council. So the city council at Worms. Worms is a city in Germany, right? So think of this as he's told to go on trial at the city council of Worms. Now he goes and he's told he must recant his ideas. He must take back what he has said. He refuses, and he is considered an outlaw and a heretic, and he is excommunicated. This now starts what I like to think of as the theological change in the Catholic Church. So when we talk about the Protestant Reformation, there's two branches to it. The first branch is the theological branch, and that's what we're talking about here. The next one we'll look at is the political changes, and that's a little bit different. So for Luther, right, his idea is that it's no longer good works or charity or any of that. It's faith that gets a person salvation. The Pope or anybody else can't give salvation. Teachings must be based on the Bible. The Bible must be the source of that text, must be the source of all belief in all success in salvation. And there's no such things as priests, right? Everybody can be a priest, and so on. This movement becomes more than a religious movement. Luther, once he is excommunicated and deemed a heretic, right? He also says that there must be a separation between the church and the state. That the church must take care of people's souls, and the state, the government, must take control of people's lives and sort of running a government. So for a people in Central Europe at the time, and again, if we go back to that map, all of these very diverse and small kingdoms and principalities, right, they're going to see a benefit by having the removal of papal authority gone, right? So taking away the power of the church would be a beneficial thing to these people, because if the church is gone, who does that power go to? The answer, obviously, is the prince or the kings. So what happens here is Luther finds ultimately about 15 different princes who will support him and who will protect him against the Catholic Church. So Luther benefits from this. And his ideas continue to spread. So that you have the emergence of other Protestant leaders as well. So in other parts of Central Europe, in Switzerland, you have a guy named John Calvin, a French former lawyer who is kicked out of France. He moves to Geneva, Switzerland, and he develops a new form of government based on Luther's ideas, and one that is, again, simplistic, more simplistic, right? More based on the Bible. And he also comes up with a new organization of church structure, right? So rather than the Pope being at the top, instead of the Pope being at the top and dictating down, this is really from the church up, right? So that the church can make decisions for themselves. Women are given some more power in the church, not a ton, but a bit more. Elected ministers are elected. Again, they don't have to be, they are not sort of distributed from a central location. These ideas then continue to spread. In Scotland, John Calvin's ideas are brought to Scotland by John Knox. So you have Luther in Germany, Calvin in Switzerland, and then John Knox in Scotland. And these ideas continue to spread. The idea of predestination is important to both Calvin and Knox. This idea that a person is chosen to go to heaven by God, not chosen, again, through faith or not through good works. It's God's choice, God's grace that chooses people. So these ideas of the Reformation this is the theological branch of the Reformation. It reduces the power of the Catholic Church and ultimately will see the rise of individual princes and help spur these political conversations that will emerge in the later 1500s and the early 1600s.